If you've been following my channel, you might remember that I recently set myself a drawing challenge with the aim of improving my skills in Procreate and finding a workflow or style that I was happy with. The challenge was to draw a dog every day using only Procreate. And I was keeping it simple, just a dog. It didn't have to be doing anything dramatic, there was no need for backgrounds or storytelling or anything else. It was all about the rendering techniques and getting that look that I was after. Well, last week marked the end of those 30 days, so how did it go? I've mentioned before that I don't have a great track record of completing these sort of illustration challenges, but this one was self-imposed. I made up all the rules myself. So, did I complete the 30 days? Well, no. But bear with me because I'm still counting this challenge as a success. So, firstly, let's tackle my excuses. There were a couple of factors that I forgot to take into consideration when I started this challenge. Firstly, the timing. The end of May and the beginning of June is the busiest time of year for my Etsy shop. It's even busier than Christmas, and somehow I'd forgotten just how crazy it can get. So there were a few days where I was essentially packing orders all day. I also did an art market in June, which is the first one I've done for a year or so there was a bit of prep involved with that as well. So there were some days where it was just a struggle to find the time or energy to draw. I have a chronic illness, an autoimmune disease, which, among other things, it can leave me with very little energy sometimes. The other thing that I forgot to factor in, well, I didn't exactly forget it, I just underestimated it, and that's how long it takes me to draw, particularly in Procreate, where it's easy to zoom right into the page and be working on details at a pixel level that no one's ever going to see. Alright, so I didn't get 30 dogs drawn. How many did I manage? Well, 15, so just half. But I'm okay with that, and I'll explain why later. The first dog I drew was this Basset Hound, and I'm really pleased with how he turned out. I think he has a good balance of simplifying the details while still being recognisably a Basset Hound, like these little dot eyes, for example. Moving on to day 2, and I drew this Beagle, who is essentially the same as the Basset Hound from the day before. I like the use of the scanned paper with the text on it so much that I just went with that again. So I'd completed 2 days of the challenge in a row, I was on a roll, then day 3, and I almost don't want to show you this one because this is where the ugly art happened. His face is just ridiculous. I don't even know what to say about it, but the rendering here is also really bad. I was really trying to make this line work look more like graphite pencil. If I zoom in on the previous day's Beagle, you can see that this is pencil-like, and I was using a combination of sort of darker, sharper pencil lines and softer shaded areas. But when I tried to take this further with this Griffon Bruxellois, I might be pronouncing that wrong, it just didn't work at all. And maybe part of that is the fact that it just wasn't a good drawing to begin with, but I don't know, the whole thing just isn't working for me. I guess the thing is, we're not going to be happy with every single thing that we draw, and I have to remind myself here that when I worked in watercolours for all those years, there were times when I made some really crappy watercolour pictures. I didn't give up painting, I just acknowledged that it was a rubbish picture and I started it again. The next day I was short on time, so I kept it really simple with this Whippet. Looking at him now, I think his legs could be skinnier, but he's fine. And I used some nice textured paper on him rather than the watercolour paint scans that the other dogs had. But there's not a lot else to say about him really. I think day 5 is where I started to drop off in terms of producing a dog every day. This one here, I think I drew him over 2 or maybe even 3 days. But I was at least still drawing every day, I just wasn't getting a finished piece out of it. And I really battled with this one. I drew the wings first and I liked those, but when it came to getting the texture and the colour of the dog's fur, it was a real struggle. I'm not happy with it. I was trying to keep the colours muted while also using the scanned paper textures that I work with in Procreate, so he went through a few different looks before I got to this. He's not one of my favourites, but sometimes done is better than perfect. So then I went back to something very similar to that initial Basset Hound, And this is a Japanese chin, and it's very faint, but like the Basset, he's got a layer of text. This time it's handwritten rather than typed. I think what I really want to achieve in my Procreate drawings is something that blurs the line between digital and traditional media, so that if you look at it, you might question whether it's entirely digital or if parts of it were pencil or something else. And this dog definitely doesn't achieve that at all. He looks very digital to me, but I still kind of like him. Maybe just because of those grumpy side eyes, I don't know. Now, remember the ugly griffin from earlier? Well, I tried to draw him again. I made it easier on myself this time by drawing him in profile, and like the others, I put some scanned paper texture before the colour, which I think just gives it a little more depth and a little more detail. This time, instead of trying to shade him as if I were using a pencil, I kept the lines fine and I just drew what was right for this image, rather than trying to force it to make it look like something else, if that makes sense. It was done with the Procreate 6B pencil, but I wasn't particularly trying to get a pencil look, if you know what I mean. And I'm much happier with this one. This fox terrier was worked in exactly the same way, layering the scanned papers, which either had patterns or textures, and adding areas of colour and the pencil shading and the lines. But this one I wanted to keep black and white, and I really like how he turned out. He reminds me a little of maybe a middle grade book illustration, and I definitely want to do some more complicated black and white pieces this way in the future. But I actually did go back to him later on and added some colour. Because I keep each element of the dog in different layers when I'm working, making these changes was like a 2-minute job. I recoloured the patches, I added this faint gingham pattern, and I used, I think it was the 6B pencil, to add some brown and pink marks around his nose and feet. So it was quite nice to see that I could get 2 different options out of the same drawing. Next came a Chihuahua, and I've no idea now how many days into the challenge this was or how many days I'd missed. And I like her, but there's not a lot to say about her really. I think this is an example of me not experimenting anymore, but just applying the same brushes and workflow to whatever I'm drawing. And that's actually one of the things that I was trying to achieve with this challenge. I wanted to get to a point where someone could say to me, draw a Chihuahua, and I wouldn't waste time wondering what materials to use or what sort of look I wanted to go for. I'd just sit down and draw the Chihuahua and enjoy the process without questioning it or overthinking it. And that's essentially what happened with most of the other dogs I drew. So there's a Boston Terrier. It could be better. There's something a bit off with his back leg, but for the purposes of a daily drawing challenge, he was fine. There's another Chihuahua with some nice textures on him. That came from a handmade paper that I scanned in, and it had all these little fibres in it. And this drawing was based on a sketch I did of my own Chihuahua, and he has these little mini tennis balls that he plays with, and they're really small and cute. But I realised after I put one into this drawing that you would just assume it was a regular tennis ball, and by comparison that would make this a huge Chihuahua. So maybe I need to change that ball and make it a different colour or something. This is a corgi dressed as a shark, and he's clearly very happy with his costume choice. I like his expression, and I like these little musical notes that you can see poking through on his chest. And this pattern on his fin, which came from the inside of an envelope. You know, those white business envelopes that have really detailed patterns so people can't read the contents through the paper. All right, and then I have one more piece of ugly art to show you. For this borzoi, I followed exactly the same steps using exactly the same Procreate brushes as I had done before, but I'm not happy with it at all. Looking at him now, I think he needs more depth, so maybe some more layers built up under the colour, like the way I used patterns on some of the other dogs. But I think the main problem is the line work. It's just, I don't really know what it is. It's just, it doesn't look like pencil shading. It's too heavy-handed, but at the same time it's too thin and spidery and all over the place. And I don't really know, but it's not working. So I didn't like this one at all, but it leads me on to the last dog that I've got to show you. Although I actually drew this one before some of the others that you've already seen. Basically, I took the outline from this digital version, I printed it out and I transferred it to my sketchbook where I worked at it with graphite pencils, and I really enjoyed this. You might have seen in one of my other videos that when I first started taking art more seriously, I was working in graphite and creating very detailed large pieces. So going back to pencils was really nice for me. There's something very relaxing about just shading with such a simple tool and the results that you can get from it. In some ways it sort of takes the thought processes out of drawing as well, and it allows your mind to just wander and dream up new things. I really, really love pencils. Now this took absolutely ages. Doing all this with a sharp pencil tip, it's obviously not as quick as using the fill tool in Procreate. So I didn't do this all in one day. It was something that I kept coming back to when I had the time, and it's far from perfect. His eyes are a bit skewed and I think I just got bored with this chest area, but that's okay because what I really wanted to do with this picture was experiment in combining it with Procreate. So I scanned this in and I adjusted the levels so that the darks were darker and the whites were whiter, and this left it looking a little flat. So the first thing I did was I dropped in this scanned paper texture. It's subtle, but it does make a difference, and when you look closely there's some nice speckles and things in the paper. Then I added colour, and I did this in exactly the same way as I had with the Procreate dogs. So these leaves and brown patches are scanned watercolour marks with the colours adjusted accordingly. And I used a Procreate watercolour brush to add some pink and grey to the white areas around his chest and nose, and I blended those out to soften them. I don't actually like the way they came out. They could have been much better, but it's done now. And then finally I added a background. Again, I think I could improve this by putting some more layers in there and maybe some patterns or different textures, particularly around this white area where it's really sloppy. But as an experiment into this technique, I'm really pleased with the process. It was time consuming, but it was so enjoyable, and this is definitely something that I'm going to try again, probably on a larger scale. Alright, so I only managed 15 out of the 30 days of the challenge, and I also didn't post every day to Instagram as I said I was going to, but to be honest that's more to do with my general annoyance with Instagram rather than the challenge itself. I'd said at the start of the challenge that if I had time after doing the Procreate dog, I might still draw in my sketchbook with other materials, and at the start I did. In fact, that last dog originally started as a little coloured pencil doodle. But actually, after the first week of the challenge, I lost interest in the sketchbook, and on the days when I did have time to draw after packing orders and everything else, I found that I just wanted to use the iPad. And that was interesting because one of the reasons for doing this challenge in the first place was the fact that I wanted to focus on improving my skills and refining my style in one area, and I couldn't choose between Procreate and coloured pencils and paints. I was sort of being pulled in different directions, and as a result I wasn't improving in any. But now, even though I only drew 15 dogs, I'm at a point where I still love coloured pencils and all those other media, but I just want to use them as enjoyable sketching or doodling tools, whereas Procreate is what I want to use going forward with my portfolio and work. Similarly, I used to scroll social media and see other illustrators making amazing work with collage or gouache or whatever, and I'd want to try that because I loved their style and what they were producing so much. But now I'm able to look at things like that and say to myself, yeah, that's gorgeous, but I don't need to do that because what I'm doing is okay too. So even though I well and truly failed when it came to 30 dogs in 30 days, I think the challenge was a success for me. I got what I needed from it. And while the 30 days are now up, I'm going to keep going. I'm aiming for maybe 100 animals, and you're allowed to laugh there, given that I only managed 15 so far, but there's no time limit on this one. I'm just going to draw 100 simple animals to keep refining this technique and finding new textures and things to use. At some point soon, hopefully in the next month, I'm going to overhaul my website, and so I think I might add a section in there for those 100 animals, and I'll just add to it as and when. At the same time, I'm going to work on some more elaborate pieces which have a narrative element to them and incorporate more environments and action and emotion and so on. So hopefully I'll have a whole new portfolio of work soon. Watch this space.